Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Peter Robinson, and today we've got Awajana Pereira, and she is going to tell us all about tracing transactions. So, Awajana, you're almost at that point of finishing your master's, but I'll do a bad job of introducing you. You please introduce yourself and do an excellent job.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm Awajana Pereira. I'm studying at Griffith. Currently, I'm doing my master's in IT. And so I'm going to present my research work I did last year, which I also presented at the SDLT, the Symposium on Distributed Ledger, last November.
Yeah. Sounds good. So please, why don't you lead off with your slides? Before you do, when would you like us to send you questions? Are you going to pause at section breaks, or should we hold them all to the end?
Maybe at the end.
Okay, all right. Yeah, that's all good. That's all good. All right, please, fire away.
Thank you. Hope everyone can see the slides.
Yep.
Thank you. So, yes, I'm Awajana, and I'm going to present my research work on using topographic attribute maps, or TAM, for visualizing blockchain transaction anomalies. And like I mentioned, I presented a paper on this same topic in STLT last year. So I'd also like to acknowledge my supervisors who helped me throughout the research, Professor Muthu, Dr. Samantha, and Dr. Liat. So moving on to my presentation, these are the key topics I'm going to talk about today. First, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the background of my problem and what the problem is, and then moving on to some limitations in the current methods of addressing the problem, and a brief introduction to what TAM is and some theory behind TAM. And then I'm going to explain the methodology I used in my research, followed by results, and concluding with the limitations and future work I'm planning to do. So we all know that blockchain is a decentralized platform to manage data and ensuring privacy and many other benefits. So blockchain has very beneficial features like decentralization, immutability, and pseudo-anonymity. However, this same feature, pseudo-anonymity, even though it offers many benefits, it's also being exploited by attackers for different illegal gains like ransomware, scams, and etc. And if we look at this graph over here, we can see how this probability of the illegal activities based on blockchain technology has been increased within the past few years. And this also shows the cost that has been resulted on these illegal activities. And these are some recent blockchain-based attacks that happened within like couple of months and last year. So the very recent one is this Bybit hack, which happened just 1 week ago. And this hack resulted in a 1.5 billion USD loss in Ethereum tokens. And then we also had the OpenAI X account hack back in last September. This was done by a group of attackers who hacked the OpenAI X account to post an advertisement on cryptocurrencies. And then again, we also had another attack on a medical firm called Change Healthcare. It happened by the beginning of last year. So this also resulted in a $22 million loss. So looking at this incidence, the problem behind these blockchain-based attacks when compared to normal cyber attacks is that due to the pseudo-anonymity in blockchain, it is nearly impossible to find out who and what people are behind these attacks. So looking at some current methods that are used on this area. So many researchers show that due to the complexity of blockchain data, and this often comes in large-scale data. So due to this reason, blockchain data analysis has been very complicated. And due to the same reason, mainly graph-based analysis methods are used to visualize and analyze blockchain-based transactions. And talking about graph-based analysis, the most popular method currently used to visualize blockchain transactions is called attributed graphs. I'll be talking about these graphs in slides to come. So why are graphs so important in visualization? So we all know that graphical representation is very convenient to understand. It conveys many information with a lesser words in a very simpler manner. So, and we all know that there are different forms of graphs, and different forms of graphs should serve different purposes. So these are some of the graphs that have been recently introduced to visualize blockchain related data. And we can see here that these graphs serve different purposes and these convey different insights. So the problem with these graphs is that if we want to use the same data to get a different insight, we'll have to start from the beginning because most of the graphs only use a single point of view. So that's one limitation in graphical visualization. And moving on to attributed graphs, I mentioned that this is the most popular way of analyzing blockchain-related data. So an attributed graph is a node-link diagram. Data is represented in nodes and links and showing some values in a certain attribute. And these attributed graphs mainly visualize data and their relationships with each other. And it does not support any clustering or grouping based on the attribute values. And talking about the limitations of the current methods, due to the complexity of blockchain data, most of the time it requires domain expert knowledge in understanding, even though we use even though the data is represented in graphical methods. And speaking about attributed graphs, they only visualize interactions or relationships, like I mentioned. And also, obviously, it does not support any multiple attribute visualization. So if we want to visualize data using a different attribute, we'll have to start from the beginning for developing a different type of a graph. And that's where topographic attribute maps comes in use. So topographic attribute map is a type of a graph with additionally having color shades and contour lines to convey more information and clear visualization. And it also allows us to highlight different ranges of values, highlighting them separately. So this topographic term comes from GIS fields, geoinformation systems. So these geoinformation systems use topographic maps to visualize different features, geographical features in Earth's surface. So in identifying height differences or differences in the ground levels and so on. So it's similar, this TAM is something similar to those topographic maps. And this was initially introduced in a paper published in 2020. And the researchers introduced this as an improved version for basic node link diagrams. And this is based on force-directed graph theory. And the initially introduced graph was tested on different domains, including network traffic analysis and ancestral graphs, which was similar to family trees in visualizing family trees. And where does this topographic attribute map come from? So the authors in the original paper have classified all the graphs in general into two main types as topological graphs and attribute-based graphs. So topological graphs are the graphs that are used to show relationships of the data with each other. And it mainly focuses on clearly representing the interactions and also concerned about the layout of the graph. And on the other hand, attribute-based graphs, they do not focus on the layout of the graph. Instead, they are focusing on representing the data based on their values. So if we look at these two graphs, the graphs show the representation of the same data set. So the nodes here represent different people, and their attribute is their years of birth. So when we look at this first graph, we can see a clear layout. Nothing is overlapped, and we can clearly see which person is related to which person. And if we look at the second graph, it's the same data set, but if we look at the layout, we can clearly see how the nodes are placed based on their color. And for example, if you look at the node at the bottom, it's very dark blue. And when it comes gradually up, it gradually changes the color. And compared to the first one, it's not very concerned about the layout of the graph because we can see some links overlapping with each other. So these two types of graphs serve different purposes. And the problem with these two layouts is that these two layouts conflict with each other. For example, if we need to represent data in a more topological way, we won't be able to structure that graph to show the differences in their values. So TAM is a combination of these two types of graphs. So if we look at this picture below, the third picture shows the same graph drawn in a TAM format. So we can clearly see that it has focused on the layout, and also it has focused on the highlighting the values of separate nodes. So the TAM graph is a combination of a set of nodes, a set of links, and a set of attribute values for each node. And like I mentioned, TAM is built on force-directed graph theory. In my application, I'm not directly using these force magnitudes in my graph. I'm using the forces to generate the data, but I'm not changing any forces in the TAM. But to understand TAM, I had to understand the theory behind it too. So I'm explaining that too a little bit today. So what exactly is a force-directed graph? So a force-directed graph is a node link diagram where nodes are positioned based on simulated physical forces. So the distances between the nodes in this diagram or the graph is directly depending on the magnitude of their forces. So these force-directed graphs are mainly built to prevent node overlapping and to prevent the graph from collapsing. So looking at these two pictures over here, the first diagram shows a basic node link diagram, and the second diagram shows a portion of a force-directed graph. So if we look at the first diagram, we can see that it's very complicated. The nodes have been overlapping and the links are overlapping, and it's very difficult to understand the graph here. And for the same data, if we look at the second diagram, we can see the nodes are separated from each other, and it's not as complicated as the first one. So likewise, the force-directed graphs prevent the nodes from overlapping and hence providing a clearer understanding about the nodes and the data it's representing. So like I said, force-directed graphs are built on simulated forces. So these nodes in a force-directed graph are compared to a set of metal springs combined together. So just like in the springs, there are two types of forces acting on these force-directed graphs. The first type is called attractive forces, these attractive forces are acting on the connected nodes, pushing them towards each other. And on the other hand, there's another force called repulsive force. This repulsive force is acting between all the node pairs, including the connected ones and the non-connecting ones. So if we consider the non-connecting nodes, those only have repulsive force acting on them, pushing each other away from each other. And the connected nodes has a combination of attraction and a repulsion. So these forces together maintain the graph in equilibrium, hence preventing overlapping. And talking more about force-directed graphs, these graphs are mainly focused on maintaining the graph in a clearer manner. So it does not focus mainly on the node layouts, like where nodes are positioned. So due to this reason, nodes with similar attributes or similar values may be placed far apart from each other. And my research was built mainly on two questions. What's the contribution of TAM in blockchain transaction anomaly visualization? And secondly, how does this TAM-based approach overcome the current challenges in the blockchain anomaly visualizations? And my proposed method is the usage of TAM for visualizing blockchain data anomalies. So like I said, there are few limitations in the force-directed graphs, like placement of the similar nodes far apart from each other. So limitations like this are overcome by the usage of TAM. So if we look at this diagram over here, this is a sample diagram for a sample data developed using TAM. So since it's built on force-directed graph theory, the same thing might happen here. The similar nodes may be positioned far apart from each other, but due to these color mapping techniques, even though similar nodes are placed far apart from each other, they are placed in the same color contours. So we can easily identify which nodes have similar values, which nodes are different in values with one another. And like I said, there are two main forces acting on this TAM called link strength and similarity force. And in my application, I've maintained these magnitudes of these two forces constant. I'll explain that later on. And due to the color mapping techniques and force-directed graph theory on this TAM, it provides a clear visualization using representing node interactions clearly and node clustering clearly. And this is the very first force acting on TAM. It's called link strength. So link strength is the force acting on the connected nodes, and this helps to maintain the graph in equilibrium. And looking at these two diagrams, we can see how the shape of the graph changes with a slight change in the magnitude of link strength. And the first picture is the link strength maintained in the default value as in the original TAM tool. And in the second picture, I have slightly reduced the link strength, and it has changed the shape of the graph entirely. And the second force is called similarity force. So similarity force is acting on the nodes that are similar in their values. And this is the force that's responsible for clustering the nodes and placing them in contours and color shades. So even this force, if we slightly change the magnitude of the force, the graph will change its shape. And by default, the TAM tool maintains a similarity force of 0. And if we slightly increase that, we can see how the nodes in a similar color are pulled towards each other. And in my case, I'm not concerned about placing the similar valued nodes together. Instead, I'm focusing on identifying anomalies. So I don't want my nodes placed together. So I'm going on with the default value of the similarity force, because the first graph is more clearer in identifying anomalies. So moving on to the methodology, The methodology used for the research consisted of three main parts. First, the data was collected, and this collected data was pre-processed and moved on to the graph modeling stage. And then again, the graph, before importing the data to the TAM, the data had to be normalized to bring them to an acceptable range supported by the TAM. So speaking about data collection, the data was collected from public blockchains using a public API called BlockCipher. And the collected data included transaction data from externally owned accounts. This included both normal transactions and phishing-based transactions. So these phishing-based transactions are the anomalies we were expecting to visualize. And the second stage, which is data pre-processing, at this stage, all the null transactions and invalid transactions were removed for clear visualization. And like I mentioned, TAM is all about representing data based on their attributes. So at this stage, it was important to extract all the features or attributes we required for the visualization. And the original TAM tool only supports files in JSON format. So it was important to convert this API raw data into a compatible file format, which is a JSON format. And at the graph modeling stage, an attributed graph was developed for the same dataset. In this case, it was a money flow transaction graph. So this is a diagram of the attributed graph developed for this application. And in this case, the nodes are the EOA addresses of our dataset, and the links are the transactions that happen between each EOA. And data normalization is the final step before the visualization. This is also a vital step in the process. So at this stage, the requirement was to convert the data to a format that's supported by the TAM tool. So like I mentioned, this TAM tool has never been used to visualize blockchain data before. So it was very important to understand the exact range that is supported by the TAM. So because we had to convert our data to a acceptable range. So there was no standard normalization method for the TAM tool. So trial and error method had to be performed. So different methods were tried to normalize the data to bring them to an acceptable range. So it was done by multiplying the data set by powers of 10. And another important thing is that when we are using a data set on TAM, it should be, the values of the data should be evenly distributed within a range. If we look at this diagram over here, this is the ideal dispersion of data values to be used in TAM. So in the TAM, we could see different color shades. So these color shades are generated based on the values of the graphs. So the TAM algorithm first identifies the minimum value in our data set and the maximum value in our data set and calculates a mid value based on those two. And then this whole range is broken down into similar chunks, and each chunk is assigned a shade, a color shade. So if we don't have our values evenly distributed within a specific range, it will be very difficult to generate a color. So it's very likely that we could only see just one color on the graph. So these are some value distributions that may not be very clear when visualized using TAM. So if you look at this first diagram, all the values are placed in a very high value. So it might not be broken down into different color shades. And the same scenario will happen to the second diagram 2. And for TAM visualization, I mentioned that TAM only supports JSON files. So it was important that the data to be converted into JSON objects. So in this JSON file, we had to specify nodes separately and the links separately. And each node had to be specified using 3 properties, the node identifier, the name, and the value. And for the name in our application, the EOA address was specified, and for the value, whatever the attribute we were planning to use was specified as the value. And in this case, we have visualized data using 2 different attributes, initially based on amount of ether, and then in degree and out degree. And another thing about specifying the links, so TAM, maybe you saw in one of the diagrams of TAM before, in the TAM, the links are shown as arrows. So if we want them to be visualized as arrows, it's important that we set this directed property to true. If not, if we set this to false, it will be just visualized as just straight lines. And moving on to the results and analysis, this was the very first graph we received for our original set of data. So we cannot see any color shades over here. This is due to the reason of the problem with value distribution. So like I said, if the values are not properly distributed, the TAM algorithm is having difficulty in generating color shades. So it's important that we have data set with evenly distributed values. And since we didn't get a proper visualization here, then we decided to normalize the data. And the first picture, the first diagram shows the visualization we got for the normalized data. And then again, we faced another problem. So even if the values are, majority of the values are properly distributed, there may be some minority of values that are not evenly distributed, that may fall into an extremely high end or extremely low end. That same thing happened here. So the range of our data set varied from 0.01 and up to 10,000, like you can see in this diagram over here. But the majority of the values fell between this small range, which is 2,100 to 2,108. So the problem was that even though this range varies up to 10,000, the majority of the values fell onto this, but the TAM calculated the range as from 0 to 10,000. So this small range over here was considered negligible. So it was impossible to detect any anomalies within the data that fell onto this range. So to fix this one, we had to filter out the data, which is the majority of the data which fell onto this range, and visualize them separately. And the second diagram shows that visualization we received for the filtered data. So in this case, we could clearly observe the anomalies in that particular data set. So we noted down all the anomalies we observed in the first stage and the second stage, and we cross-checked them with the labels in our original data set. And this is the second attribute we used. However, we couldn't get a proper clear visualization based on in degree and out degree. Well, explaining about in degree refers to the number of transactions that were received by each EOA, and out degree refers to the number of transactions that were sent out of each EOA. And in conclusion, we have introduced a novel approach by using TAM-based approach to visualize anomalies in blockchain transactions. So due to the color mapping technique and attribute-based clustering in TAM, it provides more insights and clearer visualization in understanding and identifying anomalies in a data set. And due to this color mapping techniques, it helps us to understand the graph easily. So without expert knowledge on graphs and blockchain data, we can clearly identify what are the anomalies in a set of data just by looking at the graph and their color shades. And for the very first attribute we used, which is the amount of ether, we could achieve an accuracy rate of 84% of true positives. And this method is still under research, and we are planning on extending this to support other domains too. And talking about limitations, the TAM tool actually consumes very high processing power. So if we want to visualize a large data set, we may want to use a machine with very high powerful processor. So this is due to the reason that it uses color generation. So it sort of consumes more power. And the other problem is that it requires precise data tailoring. I explained how we struggle to normalize data and come up with a proper normalization. We had to try different approaches. So that's due to the reason that this TAM does not still have a standard normalization approach or normalization algorithm. And another limitation is that it currently supports static data only. So, yeah. And for future work, we are planning to improve TAM to support data from multiple domains to be visualized simultaneously. And then again, we are planning to improve this to support dynamic data. And another future work is that I'm researching on using this approach to visualize anomalies in vulnerable smart contracts. So yes, these are some of the references I used on the presentation. And like I mentioned, there's a paper that is yet to be published based on this same topic. And yes, thank you for listening. If I have more time, I can show a small demo on the on how this TAM is generated.
Yes, please. That'd be wonderful. Though, should we pause for a sec to see if there are questions? Yeah.
If I can ask a question, I know it's listed under future research, but I was curious to know if you've got some examples of things you're going to have a look at in smart contracts. It'd be interesting to, I think that could be a very interesting area to look at.
Yes, Jan, thank you for the question. So currently I'm researching on vulnerable smart contracts, but I haven't done anything much. So I haven't used TAM yet on that area. So currently it's under research.
No worries. I'll keep a lookout for future developments. Yeah. Thank you.
I had a question. So you talk about multiple domains. Does that mean like ERC20s as well as Planey?
Yes, the problem is like currently we have only used Ethereum data on this. So we are also planning to use data from other blockchains as well. And yeah, and maybe other types of tokens.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. All right, please lead off on your demo.
Thank you. So this is the original tool proposed by its original authors. I'm using the same tool. I haven't changed anything. And like I mentioned, it only supports JSON files. So this is just a sample set of data, and it doesn't have a proper meaning. And so the graph is not very clear, so I'm going to hide the names of the nodes. So this is the initial view of the graph, and still we can see different colors of the nodes. So if we point out to one of the nodes, this holds a value of 20, which has a darker blue. And if we go to a lighter node, this holds the value of 200. So I think this one's the maximum value over here. And yeah, this value of 2. So 2 should be the minimum value. So the range is considered as from 2 to 200, and it's broken down into similar chunks, and each chunk has got a color. So when we freeze the graph, so we can still see how this graph is maintaining equilibrium. If we just move any of these nodes, they still bounce back to maintain equilibrium. So that's the beauty of the force-directed theory. And we can freeze the graph from here, and then we can see how each node is fallen into a different color shade. So if we look at this one, this has a value of 80, and I believe this has a similar, yeah, this also has a value of 80. So since the similarity force here is 0, it's not trying to bring all the similar nodes together like I mentioned in my slide. So I'm maintaining the similarity force as 0 because I'm concerned about identifying the anomalies. So even though these two have similar values, they are not brought together, but still we can identify the anomalies here. So this seems as an anomaly compared to the rest of the nodes. So yes, that's about it. Yes, so that's about the demo, Peter. Any other questions?
Not from me. I can see that as a visualization technique, this has got a lot of promise, but I don't have questions. Does anyone else have questions? All right, I've got a question. So you were saying you've got 3 more months and then your master's is done. And I know from what we said earlier, you're going to do a PhD. Is it going to be in the same area, or is it going to be an extension of this work, or are you going to, change to something a little bit different?
Well, I haven't decided it properly. I'm working on this, and at the same time, like I said, I'm working on smart contracts too. So at the moment, I'm doing my dissertation on smart contracts, and I'm reading about vulnerable smart contracts and identifying vulnerabilities and those methods. So I'm also trying to find a way to combine these two together. Yeah. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. Let's see. Shall we did you incorporate those end slides into your presentation?
Oh, yes, I did.
Okay, great. Let's see if we can get to them. Yep, cool. All right, so the merch store is still open. Next door slide, please. Yeah, so we've got a whole stack of talks coming up. Ermias is in 2 weeks' time is going to talk about the data availability landscape. Then we've got 2 talks actually on core Ethereum stuff. So Pierre Daz is going to appear in the hard fork that's coming up later this year. And free slot finality is another really interesting topic, because it would mean that rather than finality taking 2 epochs, so 64 slots, it might only take 3. So you'd have 30-second finality on Ethereum, which would be a massive change. And there are a few other talks that are in the works as well. And next slide. Yep, there we go. All right. So if you're watching this live, we're on YouTube. If you're watching the YouTube video, you can come along to the meetup, and then you'll be able to ask tricky questions. There's a Slack workspace, and sometimes there is example code too. And that's all. So Look, Abhijana, thank you very much. Good luck with getting your master's thesis written up, and I hope it all goes very well.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity, Peter. And thank you everyone for joining and listening. Yeah, see you later then.
Yeah, see you later. Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Yeah, bye.